All right, I'm here. Wherever you might be joining us, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday. Thank you so much for joining us, making us a part of your day, whether you're listening to us live or watching later on the YouTube channel or listening on in podcast form, wherever you might be participating in the JMULL Show today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Like I said, thank you so much for being a part of the day. Listen, if you're in the southeastern part of the United States, along with me, hope you're staying safe. Hope your family is well. That your personal assets, your houses, your cars are doing okay. I mean, here in Memphis, we got very little of the impact of Hurricane Laura. But it did come through here. It did rain pretty hard last night. The wind's been up the last 12, 15 hours or so, banging against the walls of my house here. So I hope that any of you that are in that area, in this area of the country that have been affected by the hurricane in any way, shape, or form, that you're doing fine, that you're doing well, and that your entire family is healthy. We got a lot to get to today. We got some fun things to talk about, like Toronto and Boston, that series that will get underway here in the next couple days. And it's going to be awesome. I think there's a chance that it's one of the best series of the playoffs. Both of those teams are good enough to beat the Bucks in a hypothetical Eastern Conference playoff, in an Eastern Conference Finals. Excuse me. They're both capable of beating the Bucks. So it's not like this is a fight to see who gets to go lose to the Bucks, like it was when LeBron was still in the East, and really every series was just a fight to see who got to get closer to losing to LeBron, if not in the next round, then at some point in the Eastern Conference playoffs. That's not the case this year. There's a lot of reasons to suggest that either of those teams could beat the Bucks, but that series in and of itself will be awesome. And we'll sort of start to dive into that a little bit prior to the beginning of the series that should be this weekend. We got a podium today, a podium inspired by the events of this past week. It's the three most impactful moments in sports history, moments, days, events, whatever word you want to use, that had nothing to do with the sport being played on the field that day. In other words, it had nothing to do with any home run or any three-pointer or any championship that was crowned. It had to do with the events surrounding the game, the situation of the game, and not actually what was happening on the field. Because what happened this week will be... What happened this week, it's historic, it's unprecedented, and I feel we've thrown those words around so much in 2020, but in a lot of ways 2020 has been a historic and unprecedented year. And what happened on Wednesday is yet another example of that. Let me fill you in real quick if you're not sure on the details. So on Sunday we had another instance of police brutality in this country. Jacob Blake being shot 7 times in the back in Kenosha, Wisconsin. You knew that this wasn't going to go away after the protests that were organized in response to the George Floyd incident and murder in Minnesota earlier this year. We knew this was going to happen again. It's heartbreaking that it happens. That it happened. It's happened dozens and dozens and dozens of times since that one, and we have another one that's on camera and another one that the world is angry about. And on Wednesday, the Milwaukee Bucks took it among themselves admirably, and you should applaud them for it, as the team to basically begin the shutdown of the sports world. Now, in a couple ways, the circumstances were lucky, is I guess the word you would use. I mean, the Bucks were the first game in professional sports really on Wednesday. I mean, it doesn't happen so often that professional sports, especially playoff games, are beginning at 12:30, 1:30, depending on where you live. But they set the tone, and they said, listen, we're not playing because there are more important things today that are happening in our backyard, essentially. Kenosha is less than an hour from Milwaukee. And they put their foot down and said, listen, today sports are not important enough. And there are things, sports are oftentimes meant to be a moment of distraction and release from what's happening in the world. And on Wednesday and yesterday, sports in this country almost universally came to the conclusion that distraction was not should not be rewarded over the last couple of days, because there were things that absolutely needed to be talked about and things that absolutely needed to have the spotlight, and not whether or not the Bucks finished out the series and beat the Magic in 5 games, or whoever, or the Lakers finishing up the Trailblazers series in 5 games. Whatever was supposed to happen in the sports world that day was not important enough. Earlier this year, and every podcast I'm on nowadays, I seem to quote this statement from Sean Doolittle, a reliever for the Washington Nationals. He said, and this was earlier in the year, and at the time was in response to being asked about COVID-19 and playing baseball. He said, listen, sports are the reward for a functioning society. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I don't know the exact quote, his exact words, but the gist of it was, sports are a reward for when society is functioning. And at the time, he was talking about a functioning society in the context of public health. In the context of our current state of public health, sports are not a reward that we deserve right now. There are more important things, like making sure people's lives aren't put at jeopardy, both normal people, regular people, and athletes alike. Those sports are a reward, and we shouldn't get that reward right now. That same statement can be applied to what the Bucks did, and can be applied today. In that same context, I mean, coronavirus by the numbers is more prevalent and impactful than it was when Sean Doolittle said the things that he said. But you can change the context completely, and the statement still makes so much sense. Sports are the reward for a functioning society. A reward. So you finish your homework. You get a good report card, yeah? You get to go get ice cream, or you get the new, a new piece of electronics that you wanted. You get whatever it might be. You get that reward you've been working for. You get that reward for your functioning academic endeavors. You get that release, and you get the pleasure of that reward that you worked for. This country has some work to do before they get their reward. And that's the statement that the Bucks and the rest of professional sports made on Wednesday. They made the statement that we as a country, and this doesn't change the fact that we will have sports again this weekend does not change the sentiment here. I think that's really important here, is that you don't go and say, hey, listen, they realized how much money they were going to lose, so this is why they came back to playing sports. I'm sure that the money was a part of it. I'm not naive. And I'm sure the fact that some of the more even-keeled voices in the NBA were like, listen, if we don't finish this season, it could be a really long time before we have basketball again because of the potential of a lockout. I'm sure that was part of it. I'm not naive. But that doesn't change the sentiment of what the Bucks did on Wednesday. There have been instances before when teams and players refuse to play, refuse to represent their country. It's happened before. But it's happened for like a Team USA basketball team that was going to win the Olympics anyways. It's happened in a preseason baseball game. We're talking about Game 5 of the Eastern Conference first round. And by definition, the best team in the Eastern Conference walking out on their playoff game. Historical. Unprecedented. And yet another example of the fact that the players of sports in this country, not the owners, not the leagues. The owners and the leagues have this power too, but we knew that. The players in this country have the power to stop sports. And they should feel empowered to do so when they're hurting in the ways that they were hurting on Wednesday and hurting on Thursday, and Doc Rivers was earlier this week, and that they continue to hurt today. And what needs to... I'm not here to tell you if what the Bucks and the rest of the sports world did was right or wrong. How I'm talking about it, I think you can come to the conclusion on which side I'm aligned with. I'm not trying to hide that. But I'm also... But this show isn't about what I think. And this show isn't about me trying to tell you what's right or wrong. What's really important here, and Josh Doring said this yesterday on Touchline Talk, which he did a phenomenal job talking about this. What matters here is that we continue to empower players to speak up and continue to make it clear that who they are as human beings and who they are and where they are hurting and how they are hurting is far more important than whether or not, in this instance, the Bucks finish out their first round series. Far more important. Almost 4 years ago to the day, Colin Kaepernick kneeled for the national anthem. August 26, 2016. He sacrificed his career to do that. Maybe he didn't realize that's what he was doing at the time, but it's what ended up happening. His NFL career effectively ended because he knelt for the national anthem in a peaceful protest of police brutality. Don't let that be the case here. Don't blacklist athletes for what they've done today or what they've done in the last 2 days. I can't begin to describe to you how important that is. Embrace what these players are doing. Don't fight it. Embrace it. Applaud these young people for being voices of change and inspiring so many, and refusing to just shut up and play basketball. Because here's the secret. They would love to be able to just shut up and play basketball. I think that's lost here. They would love, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody said it yesterday, that listen, I would love to just shut up and throw, shut up and pitch, shut up and hit, shut up and shoot. Would love to. Because that would mean that there were things in this country that weren't bad enough that we felt like we had to stop playing to talk about. Nobody wants to have to talk about these things. Now, we're at a situation where people feel the need and it's necessary to. And at that point, that might mean that they want to because they feel like they need to. But these athletes... they're not jonesing to stop playing. They would like to play. They're athletes. That's what they do. But they also understand that this week People didn't deserve and didn't need and shouldn't have the distraction of sports. Use whatever verb you want to. Forced, made, pushed towards, paying attention to this, and not hiding behind the fact that there are NBA playoff games. So let's watch those and not talk about it. Embrace that. After the NBA walked out on their playoff games, the WNBA followed. The MLS followed, except for one game that was already in progress when the MLS's players decided that they weren't going to play. And so at that point, much like the Big East Conference tournament in New York City, those games that they played on the day that I believe it was Creighton and I actually don't know who it was. I think St. John's was a part of it. But what happened on that day was everyone else had shut down and the Big East still began a game. And they didn't learn about the new laws, the new rules in place in New York City. They hadn't heard from other conferences until that game had already started. And so they shut it down at halftime. The same case happened in Nashville, which is why that soccer game was completed, because it had already started and nobody knew the conclusion and the agreement that MLS players had come to. The NHL didn't that night, but followed yesterday. There were no NHL playoff games yesterday. Baseball games have been postponed as well. And even though these games are going to return, it doesn't take anything away from what they've done. And it doesn't take anything away from the statement that they've made and the conversation that they've forced upon this country and the power that they are using to get people talking about this. And more importantly, stop them from talking about the NBA playoffs for a few days. You should do not. I won't tell you what to do, but I can do nothing but applaud. I can do nothing but applaud. If nothing else, hear these two things. And like I said, I'm not here to tell you whether what they did was right or wrong. I'm not here to tell you what you should do. But I'm here to tell you what I'm going to do. And I strongly encourage you to think about doing the same. Please hear these two things. First, listen. Listen to people. Okay? Hear where they are coming from. Appreciate who they are and what they have to say, regardless of if it aligns with you or not. If we just had the ability to discuss these things, and everybody had the ability to listen and truly understand where people of color are coming from in this country. Me as a white man, I have no authority on this topic. Unfortunately, in this country, me being a white man means that when a cop pulls me over for speeding, I never feel in danger. And these aren't the kind of conversations I am going to have with my children. But what I can do is listen. And like I said, appreciate what people have to say and listen to where they are hurting and how I can help. However that might be. Listen. Just listen to what they have to say. And really hear what they're saying and take it seriously and just validate people for where they're coming from. Just listen. And you'll be amazed by what you actually hear. And number 2, be empathetic. Maintain that ability to put yourself in another person's shoes, because that will help you understand just a little better what it is they're going through. And if you can't quite imagine what it's actually like to be in their shoes, and certainly it's something that I struggle with, I don't think I could ever quite understand what it is to live in that kind of fear every day just based on the color of your skin. But be empathetic for the sake of validating the way that people are feeling. Especially those who wake up wondering if today is the day that they're going to be the next George Floyd or Jacob Blake because of the way that they look. Please just listen to people. And please be empathetic. Have an ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Because when we look out for each other, this all becomes so much easier. When we look out for each other, when we understand where people are coming from and the pain that they're feeling, the conversation, the love is just so much easier to come by. So please, listen to what people have to say. And be empathetic of where people are coming from. And please, for crying out loud, understand that in 2020, for many reasons, sports are not anywhere near the most important thing. They never are. But in 2020, more so than most years. Making this society as safe and good and happy as possible for everyone is far more important than any sporting event or your feeling, my feeling, anybody's feeling of entitlement or sense of entitlement to sports as entertainment. Please understand that, and don't be the person in a Twitter section saying, well, what the hell is not playing a basketball game going to do? It's going to get people talking, and it's going to show people what there is to do. Chris Webber said something about you can't be something until you've seen it happen the other day. The NBA shutting down, and these young black men and young athletes in general shutting down a professional sport for the sake of social and equality and racial injustice lays the groundwork for the next generation to continue to do the same. And hopefully, one day, we don't have to stop sports for this anymore. Because it will continue to happen until it doesn't need to. This isn't happening just because they're in the bubble. It will continue to happen because NBA players now and athletes now truly understand the power that they have. The power to shut down sports. We'll talk about Toronto versus Boston coming up next. You're watching The JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to The JMULL Show on a Friday. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. Thank you so much for making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys giving me the chance to talk about what I talked about in the first segment. It's very important to me, and getting the chance to talk about it is one of the parts that I really love about this show, is having the chance, the platform to talk about that kind of thing, because it's very important to me. And I greatly appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that. With that being said, there will be basketball soon. And included in that is a Toronto and Boston series that really could end up being one of the best series of the entire playoffs. It really could be. And as of right now, it looks like that series is set to begin tomorrow at 3 p.m. Of course, it was up in the air. It looks like, it was up in the air whether they would be resuming play today, whether they'd be resuming play tomorrow. It looks like they're going to be resuming play today. Milwaukee, Orlando, Houston, Oklahoma City, Los Angeles, Portland. Part of that, there's some interesting things there, like the fact that looks like Russell Westbrook is explosive. That's all I've seen on my Twitter this morning, is how explosive he looked in 5-on-5. Unfortunately, it's the playoffs, and Russell Westbrook isn't exactly known for helping his teams win championships. In fact, he's known for quite the opposite. So we'll see how much that actually matters. But for what it's worth, he's looked really good in scrimmages, apparently. But what I want to talk, we've spent a lot of time talking about Houston, Oklahoma City, Milwaukee, Orlando, and Los Angeles, Portland. We spent a lot of time talking about that. Utah and Denver, Dallas, and LA play Game 6 of both of those series. Excuse me. I'm not sure that these are right. We'll see if these are actually right. I don't actually know. These were, I was mistaken. This is what the schedule was supposed to be. It was supposed to be I'm seeing Game 6 if necessary, Game 6 if necessary, so on and so forth. So I apologize. I read that wrong. And as of right now, it doesn't look like Woj has given any update on when things will 100% return. However, he did tweet 21 hours ago that a Saturday return of games will be finalized later today. So, with that being said, now that we've cleared that up, there will be a Toronto and Boston series, and that's the whole point of this segment here. Two incredible coaches. I think Brad Stevens and Nick Nurse are two of the best in the game. And they both have teams that are good enough to beat the Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think they have a couple things. They both have an array of high-level defenders, specifically who can guard Giannis. I mean, you got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on the Boston side of things. You got OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam on the Toronto side of things. So you've got multiple defenders that you feel really good about. In a hypothetical series, of course, Milwaukee would have to beat the Heat, which I don't think is a foregone conclusion either, but they're certainly the favorite in that series. But they've got the goods. Toronto, of course, is the defending champions, and they have a chance to really defend even without Kawhi Leonard, and they've proven that this season. It's why Nick Nurse was named the Coach of the Year, and you've got everybody on that team got better, from Fred VanVleet to Chris Boucher. OG Anunoby slid back into that role he was in 2 years ago prior to Kawhi Leonard coming to Toronto, and Anunoby just sort of having to take a back seat because, of course, he and Kawhi play the same position, fill the same role to a certain extent, especially on the defensive end. Everybody got better on that team, and as a result, you have a win percentage that was better than last year's win percentage, and a team that just swept a series for the first time in franchise history. Seems legit to me. The biggest difference between the Raptors and the Sixers, and it's why the Sixers had no chance against the Celtics, is without Ben Simmons, they don't really have a guy that you want guarding Jason Tatum. I mean, the other guys on that team that have Matisse Thybulle would be next, because Tobias Harris isn't really your go-to defender in any way. And so Jason Tatum just sort of ran wild on that series, and that's what happened. And just like they have the guys to guard Giannis, the Raptors have the guys to guard Jason Tatum. They have Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet, who are just competitors. And they just have the bodies to guard Jaylen Brown as well. And you'd think that Marc Gasol, you'd rather have Marc Gasol than Daniel Tice, which is no shot at Daniel Tice, it's Marc Gasol. You've got really nice pieces off the bench. I mean, for crying out loud, you got Serge Ibaka coming off the bench. He'd start on a lot of basketball teams, and has started some this year, but they're deep. They're incredibly well coached, and they have a very real chance to win this series, obviously. But with that being said, Boston won the season series going 3-1 in 4 games, outscoring the Raptors by a total of by a full 7 points in those 4 games. Boston averaging 112.3 points per game, Toronto averaging 105.3 points per game. And in most statistical categories, they're very similar. 46 rebounds to 45.3 rebounds, 23 assists to 21.5 assists, 9 steals to 7.8 steals. Averaging 41 made field goals a game to 39 made field goals a game, but Boston taking 10 more shots. And why they're getting those 10 more shots is the biggest discrepancy between the two. In those 4 games, the Raptors are averaging 19.8 turnovers per game. That's obviously going to have to change. You can't give Boston 10 more shots with the guys that they have on the offensive end of the floor and expect to win 4 out of 7 games. Don't think that's realistic. Clearly, they went 3-1, and Boston, was fine from the field, but 41 of 93 on average. That's not phenomenal. It's actually a little lower than you'd probably like to see it. 39 of 82. That's comparably not bad. But those turnovers and giving them so many extra possessions, so many extra shots has done them in. They're committing 2.5 more personal fouls, and that's resulting in roughly 2.5 more free throws. And Boston's getting 4 points, 2 points, something like that on free throws as well, on average. What's really interesting here is what Jason Tatum has done in those 4 games. He's taken 61 shots, made 23 of those, 7 of 19 from the 3-point line. His splits are as follows: 16.5 points, 7 rebounds, 4.5 assists, shooting 37% from the field, 36.8% from the 3-point line, and 81% from the free throw line. A plus or minus of plus 24. An offensive rating and defensive rating 101 and 104 respectively. So Tatum's been decent, but he hasn't been great. He's got 12 turnovers to those 18 assists, so he's that's right at 3 turnovers a game, 66 points in those 4 games. That's where the series is going to come down to, and why the Celtics just sort of dispatched of the 76ers, because when you can't stop Tatum, what makes you think you're going to be able to stop anybody else? Because Tatum opens up the floor for everybody. Kemba Walker was really nice in that series as well. I think you're seeing pretty visibly healthy is a good thing if you're a Boston fan. Let's see, in those 4 games against Philadelphia, 19 points, 22 points, 24 points, 32 points. He played 25 minutes in game 2, but that one was a blowout, if I'm remembering correctly. Yes, they won that game by 27 points. So that's fine. He didn't need to play a lot. He shot the three better in the last two games of the series. Was 12 of 13 from the free throw line in game 4. Him looking like Kemba Walker is a really good thing for Boston. And a really interesting part of this is that Kemba's not been on a good team his entire career. He's just been kind of begging for help in Charlotte since he got there. So what does Kemba Walker look like? A guy who, by all accounts, has the intangibles that Kyrie Irving didn't, and they really trust him as a point guard in the playoffs. But at the same time, we don't know what playoff Kemba really looks like. At least in meaningful series, because Charlotte was never, maybe they're in a situation where they make a first round series interesting, but that's about it. Other than that, they've been bad. And your first sample, he committed 4 turnovers the entire series. That's awesome. Very Kemba Walker. Right around 20 points, which is where he's gonna right around 20 points in most games. You get 32 from him in the last game. 8 of 15 from the field. Gets to the free throw line a bunch. If he's playing well, then that Kyle Lowry Kemba Walker matchup is very interesting. I'm sure you'll get a lot of Van Vliet versus Marcus Smart in this series, especially without Gordon Hayward, which is also a really interesting matchup to look at. Then, of course, you've got Brown and Tatum versus Anunoby and Siakam. There's a lot of really interesting matchups to talk about here, and a lot of really interesting matchups to think about all over the floor. And it's why this series, I think, is going to be so close, because these are two well-coached teams that, for the most part, match up pretty well with each other. There are places where you'll give the edge to one team or the other. Of course, I'm giving the backcourt edge to the Raptors with Lowry and Van Vliet until they, and more particularly, specifically Van Vliet, gives me a reason to not. Then you'd probably give the edge to Boston a little bit. Certainly, him and Brown are a larger sum, I would think, even if slightly, than Anunoby and Siakam. It's a very interesting series. I'm really excited. But Enes Kanter in this series in particular, I think would be able to play some minutes, because even though you'll have to bring him out, from around the paint, Marc Gasol doesn't move very quickly. Kanter's just a good basketball player and has found a home on the bench, coming off the bench for Boston. And I think what you're going to get is a very interesting, close series between two teams that are both good enough to get to the NBA Finals. Both of these teams are good enough to do that. They're both incredibly well coached, and I think it's going to be really a great series between these two teams. And the Bucks don't want to see either of these teams. They really don't. They've got the guys to guard Giannis. They've got the superstars. Well, Tatum's on his way to being a superstar, and so is Siakam. But you've got superstar potential. And the margin for error for this Bucks team is small, for sure. It's going to be great. I'm very, very excited about this series. I think it's going to be the best one of the playoffs, unless we get just an incredible Lakers-Clippers Western Conference Finals series, which certainly isn't out of the question. We've done the sort of circle of life thing where I think I've landed back on, yep, it's the Clippers and the Lakers. That's where I started prior to the bubble. By the time we got to the beginning of the Western Conference playoffs, like, man, Portland. And then after that game 1, Portland. But then the Lakers have really just shut them up since then. The Clippers have taken control of that series against the Mavericks, especially with both a banged up Kristaps and Luka. And the teams in between, I don't think Houston or OKC are going to beat the Lakers. And if I'm the Clippers, I'm not worried about either the Jazz or the Nuggets. And so we're in a position here where I once again I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Clippers, Lakers, let's run it for 7 games and see what happens, because that would be awesome. Coming up next, we're going to do the podium. The 3 biggest moments in sports history that had nothing to do with the sport that was being played on the field that day. We'll do that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday. How you guys doing? Good. Like I said, if any of you are in the southeastern part of the United States, I hope you're doing well. I hope if you were impacted by the hurricane, that it wasn't too big of an impact, that everyone is safe, everyone is healthy, that your assets, whatever that might be, are in one piece, and that you weren't hit too hard by the storm. The podium. We do this every single Friday. It's the top 3 in some category. We've done the top 3 Friends episodes. We've done the top 3 individual achievements in sports. We've done, what else have we done? The top 3 most debated topics in the sports world. Today, it's the 3 most impactful moments in sports history that have nothing to do with the sport that was actually played on that day. Number 1 has a little something to do with it just because of the sport that it was and what that sport was up until this point, until that point in history, and how segregated that sport was. But some of these other things have much more to do with the situation surrounding it, the optics, rather than what actually happened on the field. Because I can't tell you, I don't have the winners of any of these games or any of these events on my list here. I just have what happened on those days. The bronze medal. And the idea here is to the things that define sports. Because what has happened this week, I think, is going to define sports in the future. And define the place that sports have in this world. And these are some moments that define what sports are today. So, with that being said, the bronze medal, organized college sports. Yale, 1843. The NCAA is a billion-dollar industry organization. Where would we be without college sports? Because there's of course, I think professional sports would be fine. We'd have professional sports. And we would still have amateur sports to a certain extent. And that means there's, of course, an argument that sports and school shouldn't be connected. And that's how they do it in a lot of places. But that's how it is here. What if that had never happened? I mean, college sports at its highest level in terms of popularity, football, basketball, on the men's side of things, are so huge that the fact that these players don't get paid is an issue. That's how, I think that's sort of lost on people, is that's how big this has become. That it's so obvious these players should be paid that it's a problem that they don't. You know what I mean? So, the bronze medal, organized college sports, 1843, Yale. I believe it was a boat club, is what I read, and the research that I did. But a boat club, and now we're talking about some of the best athletes in the world playing college sports, which is just is quite something, and it certainly defines sports in 2020 still to this day. Silver medal, the first televised sport. The Jesse Owens Olympics in 1936. Things really picked up in 1939, just a couple years later in the United States. Again, televised sports, where would we be without televised sports? We certainly wouldn't be paying athletes as much as we are, because a lot of the money that leagues makes are with they make these teams make a ton of money from game days, specifically football, but the NBA makes a ton of money every time they have a game in their building. But where the league makes so much money is in these television deals that, ESPN, for basketball along with TNT, you have CBS, Fox, and ESPN for the NFL. I mean, these rights to broadcast and televise these games are why sports operate the way that they do today. I mean, the NCAA basically makes all the money they need off of one event. And that's because CBS, Turner, True TV, Viacom, CBS Viacom. Throw so much money at them to get to televise the NCAA tournament. That's where all that money comes from. You know what I mean? And the fact that it was televised once and that they kept doing it set us up for where we are in terms of televised sports today. And the number one, and I think it's, it certainly, this wasn't intentional necessarily. Like, I didn't think, oh, that absolutely has to be number one. But it's very appropriate for today when young black men are speaking up, stopping sports, literally stopping them in their tracks to talk about what they want to talk about, and sports is not that thing for the day, and is not the most important thing, and that's Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier on April 15th, 1947. Now today, young black men have some of the largest and most powerful platforms in the country to talk about things that matter and not just bounce a ball. That starts with Jackie Robinson and breaking the barrier of segregated sports, specifically baseball. And now that's not a thing today. Segregated sports, that is. So that's the podium. Organized college sports, televised sports for the first time, and then Jackie Robinson. All three of those things happening before 1950. One happening before the turn of the century, back in 1843. Anyways, I thought that would be a fun podium today. Let me know what you think. But the point there was trying to talk about moments that didn't really. I don't know what happened for the boat club in 1843. I don't know who won gold medals in the Jesse Owens Olympics, and I don't know who won that baseball game on April 15th, 1947. But those are still pretty impactful days. Coming up next, we'll wrap the show real quick with some FYI. You're watching the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday. Wrapping up the show here. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. For your information, 100 NBA employees based in New York City have joined the protest, the boycott, the strike, whatever words you want to use, joining the players both in the NBA and WNBA today, not coming into work, being a part of that unified front in the NBA. I think what makes what the NBA does so impactful is that very rarely are they not unified. There are ways in which they're not unified right now in terms of how to continue the season, but they present as unified and they make actions as a unified body, even if it's conversations to get to that unified front. Employees of the NBA joining in on that and being a part of that. So 100 NBA employees in New York not going to work today. Looks like NBA games should be coming back tomorrow. Tomorrow being August 29th, that we'll get playoff games again. Looks like sports are going to return in this country, but that doesn't take away from the impact of what they did over the last few days. I mean, there's still very few sports happening, and it's been 3 days, and we're right in the middle of a lot of different sports. Important parts of the sports calendar for those leagues in this particular year. We got multiple playoffs, the beginning of MLS, keeping things going in Major League Baseball. There's a lot going on, and at the same time, there's very little going on because of the actions that the athletes in this country made over the last couple of days. And then, of course, I'll be back on Monday, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live at 11 a.m. Eastern. Touchline Talk and Around the Bases with Chris Brown, 11 a.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those will be back next week per usual. Appreciate you guys hanging out this week. Stay safe, stay healthy, take care of each other, look out for each other, and I'll see you same time, same place, 11 a.m. Eastern at 110sportsmedia.com/live on Monday. Until then, take care.